Hey, what's up guys? I'm Dave Klein, also known as Dave Control, and I wanted to talk to you guys about my Dark Souls 3 hands-on impressions. I was fortunate enough to attend an event last week in Napa where I got to play Dark Souls 3 for about, I'd say like 40 minutes, and actually dig my hands into it, sink my teeth into it, and check it out. Initially, I wanted to do a much more involved edited video. This is more kind of just free-flowing, me saying my thoughts with a little bit of organization. But unfortunately, we were going to get more B-roll, and then it kind of got pushed. And I wish I could show you guys more gameplay. There's probably some coming out of Gamescom. There might be, but I just don't have it at the moment. And I wanted to at least tell you guys my hands-on impressions. So with that said, I'm mainly going to be talking about gameplay, because that's the one thing I can talk about differently than when I talked about my impressions from seeing the game played at E3. So the first thing I want to talk about is sword arts. And the main point here with sword arts is that, or one huge thing here that's different, is we found out from playing the game at this event that there's a meter, there's a gauge or gauge for the sword arts where you have a limited amount of uses. And how much you can use kind of depends on which sword art you're using, I believe. So we started with the number 20, and every time we use the sword art, that number dropped down. And I think if you use a bonfire, that will refill your meter, but using a sword art will actually deplete this gauge, so you can't just relentlessly use it constantly. You're gonna run out. I'm assuming there'll probably be an item, like in Dark Souls 2, how you have the various herbs that restore your magic. I assume there's something like that, but you know, that's just total speculation at this point. Another really different thing with sword arts actually relates to the shields. But for what a sword art is, for those who don't know, this is a special attack that every weapon has that's like an additional attack onto your full roster of attacks that you can use. That's like some special powerful attack. So for example, the longsword had like a sword break type of an attack, or a guard break type of an attack that would break the character's guard. So I used it on an enemy with a shield, it broke their guard, and I could immediately go in for a riposte afterwards. It was also just a more powerful attack. The Great Sword has a moment of invincibility, where you step in, you get some invincibility, and then you can do a giant swooping uppercut and hurt them for a lot. But it's not like total invincibility, but you don't get stunned while you're going into this super powerful attack if you get attacked. And then the dual falchions had a really cool spinning attack. So that is completely new, this mechanic. It could be based off of weapon type, as opposed to specific weapons having their own special one. I'd assume it's more based off of weapon type, but we got these 3 different ones to try out, and that's really all we were able to play with. Now, how you actually do a sword art is going to depend on your shield you have equipped, and this is another new thing, is shields are going to play a more important factor. So shields is something we really need to talk about this time around, because I got really confused when I first started playing the demo. So as some of you may know, I love parrying, especially in Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 2, I didn't do it so much because it didn't feel right to me, but Bloodborne and Dark Souls 1, I parried all the time. Demon Souls also feels a little off to me, but now your shield's going to determine if you can parry or if you can do a sword art. And there's a little icon next to your shield that indicates what it's for. If there's a little sword icon next to your shield, that indicates that you're going to be able to do sword arts with the shield. If there's, I think, a shield icon next to the shield, that means that you can parry. So it's going to be that L2 button press that's going to indicate what you do and what it activates. So the type of shield, I think it's smaller shields are for parrying, and larger shields are going to activate your sword arts, but this might vary and depend. So shields are going to play a more important factor here in their functionality, just in that regard alone, for if they can activate the sword arts or if they're used for parry. To be perfectly honest, I like parrying so much that after playing around with the sword arts for each of the weapons, I actually ended up switching over to my shield that was used for parries and completely dropped using the sword arts. That's just how I prefer to play. But it's nice to have another option out there for people who want it for different types of attacks. As far as parrying goes, I found that the parrying feels just like Dark Souls 1, and this is coming from someone who has trouble parrying in Demon Souls. I struggle parrying in Dark Souls 2, but Bloodborne and Dark Souls 1, it feels very perfect to me. I don't have any trouble at all. So for me, this is a positive. I'm sure everyone has different opinions on which they prefer for which parry it's going to feel like, but the timing seems to be the same as Dark Souls 1 as far as parrying goes. So for me, that's a positive. Another new change that definitely needs to be talked about is your R2 attack. So your R2 attack now, which is your strong attack, is a charged attack now, similar to in Bloodborne, except you don't get that ching noise when you get it all the way up. So R2 is a charge attack, and the longer you hold it, the more damage you do, but you can let go at any point and it will attack. So it's not like you're locked into this charge attack. But that's different from the previous Souls games, however, similar to Bloodborne. Then another thing that I want to talk about for sure is enemies. So that kind of like, as far as that like gameplay and sword wielding goes, those were the major differences I noticed. I know Ty, if you go check out Dreaded Cone, I think him and Ouroboros were putting up a video together, and I'm sure Barnezy was there. He'll be putting up a video that talks more about how the mechanics relate to PvP. Definitely check out their videos because they know that stuff better than I do. And they just do. So I recommend their videos over mine when it comes to that type of mechanic. But as far as enemy design goes, the enemies are much more difficult. They're much smarter. And if you're a Souls veteran, that's definitely a positive. It brings back the difficulty to a lot of enemies. Like many of you guys, I'm sure, I can pretty much just roll through enemies pretty easily and run past them, and it's not that big of a deal. But the enemies here, a lot of them, I mean, it depends on the enemy. The more advanced they get, obviously they're more difficult, but a lot of them have mechanics to really strongly guard against this type of stuff. So one enemy that's in the game that we had to deal with was this knight character who was really similar to the knight in Demon Souls. Those knights who are at the top of Latria. No, sorry, Boletaria. Excuse me. Not Latria. The knights who are at the top of Boletaria. It's really similar to those knights. In fact, there was even one who had red glowing eyes. You're like, oh shit, I don't want to mess with this guy. But yeah, so there's these knights who kind of look like that in a way, and they, like those knights, are ridiculously harder. And not only are they do more flurry attacks, they're a little less predictable, but on top of that, they have a way of guarding against you trying to backstab them, where if you start trying to circle strafe around them, they'll actually bash you in the back with their shield. So they completely knock you off guard when you try to do that, and then they return to going to be able to fight you normally, and can even get in a swing on you because you tried to circle strafe around them. So I think it's actually a pretty brilliant design. It makes them feel smarter. And to me, it reinforced wanting to parry, personally, because I was able to pull off parries on them okay and read their attacks. I mean, I had some trouble, but I was still able to do it. And just because, you know, it's a new enemy and you have to figure out how to read that enemy. But it really brought in that sword play, I guess, of that back and forth and making every fight exciting. So that was really cool. And there's a bunch of other enemies who felt unpredictable as well. And this could have just been a case of, again, I'm learning new enemies and trying to get past them, but there's one enemy in particular who, it's a normal corpse enemy, and all of a sudden, he starts turning into this giant abyssish creature that's really lanky and long and comes and attacks you, and I just had a lot of trouble reading him. I killed him one time, and I was proud of myself, even though I kind of just stood close to him, and that helped out a lot, but after that, I just didn't want to deal with him again, because I wasn't sure, and since I had such a limited amount of time there, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take my limited amount of time and just do what I can and try to get past, so, and try to get to the boss and beat the boss. So that was that enemy, but definitely some different enemies here, there. They're trying to change it up. They're trying to make it more difficult. There are a bunch of mob areas where they try to throw mobs at you that there's so many enemies, you can't speedrun as easily. And to be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of that. Some people might be, but I don't tend to like giant crowd stuff too frequently, unless it's used sparingly. So there's also a bell ringing enemy. I think it was a bell they were ringing, but they do some sort of chanting where there's a bunch of docile enemies around who don't really do anything and they're super easy to kill. But then this chanting enemy will then wake them up and then they'll come attack you. So if you take them out quick enough, they're not going to get aggroed against you. or you can just take them out individually before you reach them, and you're not going to have this giant mob to deal with. But it did end up creating make it a little bit harder to speedrun certain areas. I enjoyed the enemy design a lot. I'd say as far as the pros of my experience playing this demo was, the enemies were probably my highest pro of what I enjoyed the most. On the flip side, one of the things that I actually didn't like as much was the level design, and some people might disagree with me here, and it's really going to depend on your opinion. So, Miyazaki had a statement when we went to check out the game at E3, which was that you could go into every building you saw in this area that I'm now actually able to show you some of, like a castle you see in the distance, and you can go into every area, which is really cool, right? It makes that open world environment, which is great. But one of the cool things to me about the Souls franchise has always been that paths feel very meaningful. They're there for a reason. And what this ended up doing was it felt like there were redundant paths, to me at least, and that there were a bunch of dead ends. Now this is an alpha build that we were playing, so it's very possible there's going to be NPCs in areas that just weren't there because all they were placing there for us were firebombs and like herbs, and that was it. So maybe the items that are going to be there are going to make it worth it and make you feel rewarded for exploring. Maybe there's going to be some sort of NPC. That's stuff that I don't know. But what I can say was that there were a couple dead ends I ran into, and it just kind of made me feel like, oh man, it's just a dead end. I did all that to hit a dead end. And, you know, it probably just felt that way because there wasn't some rewarding item there. And that's very possible. So take this with a grain of salt, this complaint I'm saying, because it's an alpha build, but it is something I noticed. I think the most glaring example of this that I noticed when I was talking about redundant paths was there's an area where there's a dragon guarding a top floor, and there's a bottom hallway that you can run past, and the dragon will, and there's a bunch of mob enemies there, and the dragon will take care of them for you, but then you have to wait and time it out and run past when he's not shooting fire down there. And that's the path you're preferred and supposed to take. And if you take that path, you get through and you're like, cool, I did it, I was smart. But I wanted to circle around later and find out what was on the upper path. So if you take this lower path, you reach a locked door eventually, and it's locked from the other side. You're like, okay, cool, I bet there's a way to get there eventually. If you take the upper path past the dragon, all you get to is one big room where there's an enemy inside, and then you open that door, and that's it. And you've opened that door. And honest, it's not at all a shortcut. It's just another door to open. And maybe later the dragon flies away, or there's something they had closed off. I don't know. Again, this is an alpha build. But when I went through, it just felt like two paths that were literally right next to each other. One of them had a locked door, one of them was open. If you go through the area with the locked door, it doesn't feel like there's any sort of shortcut, there's any sort of progress you made because of doing that. And again, it's possible. I played it for 40 minutes, and I kept on getting pulled away to do things. So it's possible I missed something, and that's why I'm saying take it with a grain of salt. I only played for like 40 minutes. But that was something I noticed, where I was like, man, this felt like a redundant path, and I don't feel like I usually see that. As far as the other design goes, you know, there were cool wraparound paths, there were shortcuts that you were able to unlock. There was, you know, they play with the verticality of the design where you're going into buildings, you're wrapping around, you're going onto rooftops, and you need to fall from one rooftop to another to get to the area you actually need to go on. There's different ladders that you're able to climb up and around. There's like a courtyard area that you go to. So, I mean, for the most part, you see that mix of horizontal and vertical design that Miyazaki does so well that made the level design stand out so much in the Souls games. I just really hope the redundant pathing that I found and the dead end thing isn't them trying to make it so you can go into every area and make it so everywhere is a possible place to go. Or if they do that, there's some sort of rewarding aspect to it that makes you feel rewarded for doing it. So, to me, that was something I felt like, you know, I should bring up. The other thing I guess I can talk about is bosses. There's a secret boss to play during the demo, and then there's the boss that we were supposed to go to and fight, which was this Dancer of the Frigid area that I'm not remember the name of. It was the Dancer of the Frigid something, and she had these giant swooping attacks. And I know some people who've seen the gameplay trailer now at this point, I think we're a little disappointed when they saw her because she doesn't look super intimidating. But when fighting her, the hard thing and what's different about her is that she has this lag in her attack that makes it much harder to read and roll through. I struggled at first when fighting her. I will say at the very end, literally right as we were supposed to be getting up and leaving, I finally beat her. And I found a method that's like basically the method for beating her. That's like, oh, this is how you're supposed to do it, and it makes it feel easy. I did find that method, but at first it was pretty difficult because it was a different type of timing and fight. I also broke the demo, which was fucking awesome. You'd ask everyone. I didn't like break it, but as soon as you beat this boss, you're supposed to, it's supposed to end. Like that's supposed to be the end of the demo, and then you have to try, start all over. I died right when I beat the boss. In classic Souls fashion, I killed it and died at the same time. And then I was respawned back at the bonfire, went into the boss room, boss was still dead, couldn't spawn it again because I'd killed it, but it didn't boot me out of the, demo. So, Sunlight Blade, aka Joel, and Peeve, who are currently in, Germany for Gamescom, hear me out. If you want to play the demo longer and you get to the boss, just, kill it and die at the same time. Boom. You're welcome. You're welcome. So overall feel of the game, because these were the biggest changes that I could think of that I took note on, or the things that I just talked about before. But overall, I say the game feels the most like Dark Souls 1 to me, with a little bit of Demon Souls. It's kind of like, but it has elements of Dark Souls 2. It has elements of Bloodborne in it. I mean, it's definitely an amalgamation of the previous Soulsborne games, but I think it's most strongly, for me, felt like Dark Souls 1, and that might be because of the way parrying felt. That might just be the way it was for me, but I think a lot of the mechanics, combat mechanics, and you can watch Ty's video, who'll really talk deeply about that, who I think is putting up a video, I could be wrong, and I think Barnesi is as well. They'll be talking about that stuff as well, and I think they'd agree that it felt most like Dark Souls 1. And I do feel like there's a little bit of Demon Souls in it, but I really left with a good overall impression. My one complaint really was that level design thing, which again, it's a pre-alpha. It's hard to tell for this type of stuff. So we'll see how that ends up turning out overall, but I enjoyed it. To me, from seeing Dark Souls 3, it felt like what I wanted Dark Souls 2 to be. Like, and this isn't the bash. I don't hate Dark Souls 2. I'm not one of those people who absolutely hate the game. I wouldn't have made so many videos about Dark Souls 2 if I hated it. But I did prefer Dark Souls 1. That was my favorite of the Soulsborne franchises, Dark Souls 1. It felt weird coming back to this game after Bloodborne. I honestly kind of missed the aggressive combat because I got so used to it in Bloodborne. But it was kind of like a twist coming back and be like, oh wait, I can't heal from hitting enemies after they hit me. I can't be as aggressive. Oh, one more note. Sorry again, this isn't as organized, but as far as healing goes, all we had to use were Estus flasks. I can't confirm there won't be life gems. I have no idea. Or mushrooms or anything, Elizabeth mushrooms. I don't know. All I can say is that all we had were Estus flasks for healing. So if that's the case, we had 10 as well, by the way, if that number matters for some people. We had 10. But again, overall, I really enjoyed it. I cannot thank Bandai Namco enough for inviting me to the event in Napa to get a chance to play the game. Like, honestly, it's so cool, and I thank them so much for that. But, I really wanted to be honest with you guys about the things that issues I had. But I'm a huge Soulsborne fan, and, maybe I'm not being as critical as I should be on things. I don't know, but I had a lot of fun with the game, and it was definitely felt like what I was hoping Dark Souls 2 would be. And honestly, so the gameplay trailer just went up today, too. And from some of the bosses that they showed, even that was a little more exciting for me than the Dark Souls 2 reveal stuff. It just felt more like Miyazaki's touch, I suppose, if that means a lot. It does. It just felt more like that. And I'm gonna leave you guys with my favorite clip from the gameplay trailer. It's a very brief clip, but this was like the one thing where I was like, oh, that looks so cool. I'm gonna leave you guys with that, but thank you guys so much for watching this video. Sorry it's a little more rambly. I've been super busy lately with a lot of things. I now have a full-time job. Before I was kind of freelancing, so I'm super busy with that, but I'll have more Dark Souls 3 stuff up. There's a big video I wanted to make that I couldn't make because I was hoping to get more B-roll that we didn't get, which I will eventually make, that I think you guys will really love, and I do plan to cover Dark Souls 3 more, as well as Bloodborne once the expansion/DLC comes out. But until then, I hope you guys enjoy what I am making for my channel, because I put a lot of work into it. And yeah, definitely check out Barnese's video, Ty's video. Terra Mantis is putting up a great video, which I'm going to link at the end. And check that stuff out. And I'll see you guys next time. Later, guys. Peace.